Oh, hey, what's up? Oh, you want to talk about metal? Sure, I can do that. What kind of metal? Oh, okay, I think I know a place. How's this? What? What? Yeah, this isn't gonna work if you want to talk. Let's go somewhere else. I have a metal room. And this one is for first place in the speed pickling competition of '04. Yeah, I know, right? And this one is for the time I beat Dylan Jarson in. Oh, what's that? You meant like metals? The hard stuff they use to make pickle jar lids? Oh, no, please. Not again. Not again. Fine. Let me go get my list. Okay, yes, I have slash had a list of sorts. It had like 22 entries, and now I'm going to acknowledge this right now. Not all were actual, like, true metals or alloys. I mean, some of these were just fictional materials in the broadest sense, like kryptonite, which, by the way, debated as a metal. I'm not going to just outright say it's not. It's a whole thing. But originally, I'd wanted to build out some kind of self-made handbook, okay, to fictional materials and metals, and with specifically metals, excuse me, with strengths and weaknesses and side-by-side comparisons, so that I could just, look at two and get an idea of where they stood against each other, with the thinking that maybe there's some kind of way to bridge gaps between universes, so I can measure two non-coinciding metals against each other. Even if it took some work, I was okay with that. I just thought there has to be some way to bridge that gap, but you kind of can't. Um, you just can't. It's ridiculous. It's really not that feasible. And what I'm simply saying was that at the time I desired all of these to be easily scaled. I wanted to look at adamantium and nth metal, which we're going to talk about, by the way, and Beskar and all these things, and I wanted to know how they would stack up against each other, despite being from different universes, like I said, as well as how they stacked up against even real materials in our world. How much stronger than tungsten is adamantium, for example? And I know that I actually said the S word in there, the siren call to all Goku lovers and Batman prep timers alike. And you might even already be typing about scaling in the comments. I don't know. While you're chugging from your G Fuel and munching on your Cheetos or something. Uh, but but listen, I get that that idea has a stigma to some people, for better or worse, and in a lot of ways, maybe it should. And that kind of topic merits its own video. And I'm not going to try to dwell here for too long, but what I want to say is about that whole internet culture, or sphere of the internet, for lack of a better term, is that when simply just imagining a fight between disconnected characters you like, it's enjoyable. I'm not saying that it's bad to do that, but again, I don't want to dwell there. See, what I'm asking for is a little bit more than just feats of characters to know how long it takes Kirby to consume the whole Dragon Ball universe and win the death battle. No, no, not that's not what I'm asking for. What I'm asking for is something more specific and likely in some ways unnecessary, and ultimately, and I'm freely admitting this, much more tedious, because I'm asking for writers and creatives to consider the basic qualities of things they can come up with. And when I say basic, I don't mean like the simple stuff that everyone thinks of. I mean basic as in fundamental, breaking something down to its basic qualities so that somebody can just look at and understand those basic fundamental things. In the instance of metals, this might be something like melting points, freezing points, tensile strength, that type of thing. That's what I mean when I say basic. And having delineated rules and characteristics is kind of important, I guess. I mean, look, hear me out. It's just nice to have established rules, especially for things like this, and it is for a couple of reasons. I mean, fan made creations are ever abundant and only getting more popular. for better or more likely worse in a lot of cases, not all, but a lot. And while I respect the work that goes into it, I don't want to diss that. But, anyways, it's nice to know when people are being accurate and doing the source material justice. But in all honesty, this is less pressing to me than the other main reason, which is this: the original product can be more consistent. This is that second reason, because I think in the world of comics we see this a lot. Things like adamantium being very inconsistent in how it's shown to be either totally unbreakable while also being damaged and broken. And what the heck? You know? And really, this is where I do want to dwell for a bit. And because we see these issues fairly often, and ultimately it's a disservice to the overall creative work. Make limitations, I beg you. Please establish them and then be consistent with them. I get that in the decades that things like adamantium have been around, it's a bit unreasonable to be perfectly consistent 24/7 with every time we see it. But while some variance and adjustment is natural, again, natural, there's also such thing as lazy or poor writing. But hey, let me get off the Marvel train for a minute and we'll come back to it. And let's rag on DC, because I think it's their turn, honestly. They have it coming. Take, for instance, the critically acclaimed and fan-loved masterpiece, the CW Greg Berlanti's Arrowverse TV show, Supergirl. What's that? No. Well then. Yikes. If, like me, you probably watched the Arrowverse for a while and tried to keep up, and then you ultimately lost all hope and just watched other people online rant to complain about it to live vicariously through them and save yourself some time. I remember watching, I think it was season 4 of Supergirl, and it was just my last attempt with the show. I don't even know if I finished the season. And honestly, that was when I gave up on the CW stuff as a whole. I think maybe I watched the Crisis stuff, and that was more just out of curiosity than like genuine interest. I just wanted to see how they would take it, and it was fine. I think I don't totally remember, to be honest. Um, but anyways, there's this one episode in Supergirl where Kara is trapped in nth metal, which, by the way, is a pretty strong metal. Um, and you would know that if you were like a geek about things Thanagarian, or a Thanageek, if you will. And it's pretty strong. And Supergirl isn't even able to break out in the show, which is pretty impressive, if I do say so myself, because she canonically beat Superman in the show in a fight where I don't think he was really holding back, since he was mind controlled at that point. Um, so surely, if nth metal is that strong as this dude, Ben, or whatever his name is, as this dude says, then I can't imagine what it would take to get our heroine out of such a situation.
Okay, we gotta get out of here.
Ben. Ben. Ben, stop! Ben, don't! Ben, put the gun down!
That's nth metal, Supergirl! No, am I struggling?
I'm not struggling! I'm flying!
Oh, really? That's it? I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure there was a lot of force in something like that, and the shock from the drop was definitely enough for normal metal. But come on, this is nth metal we're talking about here. Supergirl was evidently not strong enough to simply break it, because otherwise, surely she just would have. Let's not be unreasonable. But not only that, the molten metal also couldn't be melted again, even though she has heat vision. I mean, look, I get it. Nth metal has a high melting point, but metals don't just instantly cool, you know? Well, okay. adamantium purportedly does, and to its credit, that seems to be pretty consistent across media in that quality, and I appreciate that. So hats off to Marvel in that regard. But unless nth metal does in this universe, uh, I don't get it. But hey, that was never established or explained. But let's be honest, that's all irrelevant, seeing as it shattered like glass from what was really not that big of a shock compared to like, somebody stronger than Superman just trying to physically break it. Um, and nothing else in the building broke really like at all, even. Now, I know what you're thinking, but oh, Eloquent Pickle, how do we even know it's that strong? Well, first, a character just said it, but fair. Why trust one character who obviously isn't a fan of geek like yourself? And if I remember correctly, he's even like racist or something. I don't know, I'm too lazy to check. But it's a good thing there was an episode where we saw Kara and Mon-El trapped in nth metal prisons because it was strong enough to hold them. Crazy, I know. And I again have a feeling that I know what you're going to say, or maybe not. I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe you're thinking, well, they were weakened, and Mon-El is already weaker than Kara, which, true, sure. But you want to know something about Luthors, who, by the way, were the people holding them in these prison cells? Specifically Lily and Luthor, if you must know. They're cautious, and they plan for everything. They're prepared. So I'm going to make an inference here that something as valuable as nth metal was used because it could hold Supergirl, or at least very likely could have held Supergirl, even if she weren't weakened. It actually makes sense, all things considered. So at least CW did that right. And to be honest, I couldn't find a clip of the exact scene online, so maybe there's something specifically said or whatever, in which case, do let me know, and I will happily make a note of that. Like, I'm not going to claim to this is the end all be all, but I mean, you couldn't pay me to go look for a clip of Supergirl. And I'm not saying that the show needed to lay out every quality and characteristic of the metal for us at the beginning of that scene. That would be unreasonable. And we all know what exposition from the CW looks like, and really they were saving us pain. But I am saying that what is shown should be a reasonable result of what's established. That's just how writing works. And I'm not talking about plot twists, I'm talking about fundamental rules for plot devices that the writer is choosing to use. You should be able to be like, even if I wasn't expecting that, that thing makes sense. Okay, I accept what the writers have chosen to do in this situation with the things they've already brought in, and I'm not going to say that it's unlikely, unreasonable, illogical. Um, but the Supergirl writers chose to name drop nth metal and then go and do this. And I don't think most avid Thanageeks would enjoy this scene like at all. But I don't know. I'm not a Thanageek, so maybe I'm wrong. But the purpose of my video isn't just to rag on DC or Marvel for some inconsistencies, because I enjoy their media a lot, generally speaking, and I love their characters and their stories, generally speaking. But I want to highlight what, to me at least, seems to be a growing problem in writing at least, where more and more people are dipping into the same library simultaneously for connected and interwoven stories, and they do so inconsistently. And so it leads to this problem of inconsistency. And I think that obviously some metals in fiction might not be the biggest of issues, but they show, and they tell us what's going on under the surface. They're the basis for certain characters, for starters. I mean, fan favorites, even like Colossus and Wolverine and Absorbing Man and Iron Man and Omega Red, all in Marvel, and I'm sure there's more that I couldn't think of. But then in DC, you've got characters like Hawkman and Hawkgirl and the Legion of Superheroes and the Atom, and you've got characters like Citizen Steel, and they all have a pretty heavy reliance on the metals and the materials, as well as how they're established when it comes to their characters. And there's a danger for these characters to be over or underpowered at the drop of a hat, or suddenly not work anymore because some writers aren't staying consistent with established canon. I mean, look at what happened with Adamantium. They were forced to retcon in an alternate mixture of the metals simply to explain how Bishop could have an exploding hockey puck. What? And it was also used to explain easier defeats of Ultron drones. And that's not necessarily the point, because sure, you want your heroes to be able to defeat Ultron drones, but why do something that makes you retcon, you know? And that's not the point. What is the point is looking at how this works. Suddenly, characters in a bunch of different stories are changing because of this supposed retcon, or the retcon is coming because of pre-existing inconsistencies. And either way, that means that there are issues that probably need to be addressed. At the end of the day, the writers and the creatives are choosing what gets put in, like I've already said, and then they choose how that thing is used. Can they at least bother to make it work a little bit? Like I already said, I get that variances and inconsistencies are inevitable. It happens, but there can still be an effort to avoid them as much as possible. And to be honest, this is one facet of a much more in-depth topic. There's a lot to be said when it comes to inconsistencies in heroes and their scaling as well, or even just mechanics of certain ideas and forces within comics and other worlds and fiction. And ultimately, just characterization of a character, what to expect from an established person's personality within a fictional world. And like I mentioned, there's definitely a lot to be said about power scaling specifically, as we see it on YouTube. So if you want to hear more about that, let me know. But ultimately, I want to concede something here because I don't want you to get the wrong idea of why I made this video. Big writers in fiction are definitely not just going to fix this or anything like that. I'm not saying I expect that whatsoever. In fact, it would be naive of me to think such a thing. So why rant about this, right? Well, first, it annoys me when I see inconsistent writing or prior work being pushed aside or ignored because one writer or writer's room can't be bothered to work a bit harder and come up with something better suited for their need, and they'd rather take a pre-existing thing and just shove the circle into the square hole and make someone else try to clean the mess. But second, I see this as something that we as audiences and casual writers and casual consumers even can learn from. We can be a bit more mindful about how we make our material. See this issue and try not to follow in the wide path laid out in this area. And not just the scaling of things, but bad characterization too, even. I'm looking at you, Tumblr fanfics of the Bat family that sometimes make no sense at all, and their ideas are just not what I would want in my Batman story, but I'm not going to diss them for trying to get their hand fun ideas. And this is an example to learn from, ultimately, I think. I'm not the first to say anything about it, I'm sure. And maybe it comes off even as a bit nitpicky or elitist, I don't know, or something. But I just wanted to use a few examples as a way of highlighting what I think we have all probably noticed one way or the other in our own consumption of media. And I could talk about inconsistent characterization. That's a whole different video topic as well, along with scaling, so maybe later. I don't know. At this point, I've been sitting on this for long enough to be sick of it, and I don't know. To sum it up, I guess my point is, but not that. I just care more about the work, your own, and the work you consume. Because it's one thing to do this on accident, it's another thing to cut corners. So be like Wendy's, but metal. You know, it's a bit funny that all of this whole video, this whole topic, the research I did and everything, it's funny that it all spawned just from me wanting to be able to know what the strongest material in fiction was, because that's really what the goal of my document was supposed to be. And especially considering it wasn't even any of the things I've mentioned in this video, or any of the things I researched for my list. In fact, the strongest material in fiction isn't even a metal. Now, while I was looking into this video, I came across this one surprisingly common thing from Marvel Comics that I was familiar with, but I didn't really consider. But if you actually read the comics, you'll quickly see that the strongest material in all of fiction is Hulk's pants. It's Hulk's pants. I mean, look at them. They're always there.